Welcome to Houston House at South by Southwest. I'm Natalie Harms, editor of Innovation Map. As global energy demand forecasts continue to show the ever-increasing need for energy, the industry is preparing to meet this demand with a heightened focus on decreasing environmental impact. Companies across the board have implemented environmental, social, and corporate governance practices to move with the times and bolster investment. ESG has quickly become a standard in the industry, but has also given rise to a development of technologies that specifically aim to lower a company's footprint. I sat down with Andrew Bruce, founder and CEO of Gumbo, and Al Carnrite, president and CEO of the Carnrite Group, to talk about the rise of ESG and its significance in the global energy transition. Al, Andrew, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited for this discussion, but before we really dive in on ESG and the energy transition, Andrew, tell me about Gumbo and what you do.
Gumbo, we're building the world's largest smart contract network for industry, which means that we're automating transactions between industrial players and making sure they're more efficient.
And Al, how do you work with Gumbo, with the Carnrite Group, and what do you do?
The Carnrite Group is a management consulting firm focused on energy and the industrial space. We do a lot of strategy work, a lot of things in the energy transition, and the like. And we met Andrew a few years ago when he was first starting Gumbo, and we thought this is exactly what the industry needs, is more transparency and more diligent way of working between supplier and oil and gas companies. We just thought it was a natural fit, and we try to work with them and go to market with them.
Great. So set the scene for us. What's happening right now, both in the U.S. and globally, with the energy transition?
Well, the U.S. is definitely behind Europe when it comes to energy transition. Europe is likely 5 years ahead, especially the UK, which was the first to commit to zero carbon by 2050. So they've moved a lot faster than we have in things like wind, solar, carbon capture, refining biomass, biofuel, that type of thing. So US is definitely behind the curve. The investors are expecting and have an expectation that we're going to catch up. We need to get moving. So I've got no doubt that there will be continued progress in the U.S. around the energy transition, but it's not one size fits all. Some companies will stay in the traditional oil and gas. Some companies will be totally a clean energy company, and others will be somewhere in the middle. And I think there's room for all kinds of hydrocarbon and energy mix.
So Andrew, it seems like clock struck midnight for 2021 and everyone started talking about ESG. So why is that? Why is this a moment for ESG? What started that?
Well, it's been going on for quite a while, right? So it's like the rock band starts to say, right? I mean, we're an overnight sensation. You don't see the 10 to 15 years that happen while they're playing in small pubs. But I think that the investor pressure that's coming on the board of directors for the companies is really starting to hit home. And so if you're hitting home at the board level, then you're starting to impact the way that the companies behave. And so I think that the BlackRock pressure has really started to take hold, and people have to take it seriously. I mean, people, investors, individuals, they're voting with their wallets. So, I mean, how do you change behavior? You get the consumer to actually vote with their wallet and what they're investing in, and the big pension funds, what they're investing in, and it changes the behavior of companies. So I think that it's been a long time coming, but as you said, the clock struck midnight in 2021, and here we are. You can't have a conversation without talking about ESG. I mean, it's just every conversation you have is about it.
I actually don't know the last time I did an interview without talking about ESG, so it feels very real. But the most important part of this, right, is transparency. So what role does data play in that, and what role does Gumbo play in that?
Well, thank you for that question. As you know, we just released Gumbo Net ESG. So what we do is we use IoT data to confirm transactions, and it turns out we have a relationship with SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, We've licensed their standards, and so what investors need, in our opinion, is, and the reason we did this is because if you're investing in a company that says they're green or aiming for carbon neutral, how do you know for a fact that they are carbon neutral? There's lots of people with lots of presentations saying, yes, we're carbon neutral and we've got a green strategy. But it's like the good housekeeping seal of approval, or the grocery stores, we were just talking about that. How do you know food is organic? Well, how do you know that the company you're investing in does have a strategy which is based on fact? And that's the big, if I'm investing and I'm investing because I'm investing in a green company, I want to know that the company that I'm investing in does have a green strategy and they are executing on it. And I think that that's going to be the next wave coming is, do we know for a fact that this company has got a sustainability and carbon neutral strategy, and are they executing on it? Because it's been driven at the board level, but as an investor, I want to know that my money is going in a company that is backing it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And ESG is not an energy industry specific thing, but it definitely has a lot of potential for disruption in the energy industry. So Al, tell me about what's happening with ESG in the energy transition.
Happy to. Every company out there has what I'd call an aspiration around ESG. It can be less flaring, it can be basic things like that, but everybody's got an aspiration. We're working with our clients and helping them put the strategy in place, and then more importantly, how do you operationalize and get it done? And as step one in that is you need a baseline, as Andrew just referred to. And that's been a manual exercise up till now. So Data Gumbo's doing some things at the macro level or corporate level. A company called Persephone's doing some measurement and reporting back to SASB. So there's some really interesting things in the back end and the front end of the whole data piece. But from our perspective, we have a lot of people talking about it, but we're all trying to figure out how to actually implement it. And it is a challenge because the returns, we're not sure what the return profile looks like. And we've done a poor job investing our own capital in the oil and gas space. So we're up against some pretty poor track record, and we're trying to pivot to something that looks a lot different.
Can I add on
Absolutely.
to that point? Because I think that one of the things that SASB brings is that they bring a strategy or a blueprint to industry, so that if I'm an executive in a company with pressure being put on me by the board of directors, how do I get started? It's an insurmountable problem. So it's insurmountable is an exaggeration. It's a very big problem. But how do you get started? So you have to have a blueprint. You have to have a strategy. You have to have a step-by-step guide that will get you there, and you have to figure out how to pay for it. And that's the big thing that I think people, as Al and I were talking about before, is people are underestimating how are you going to pay for this, because it is an expense for companies. We're in a tight economy. We're especially in the oil space. So how are you going to pay for this? So what we've determined is that by being more specific about and tightening up your commercial transactions, the same data is used for SASB reporting as it is for commercial. And so you can actually put together a funding strategy and a rollout strategy by getting on board with the SASB standards and put together a blueprint so that you can say, okay, here is our strategy that we're going to be executing for the next 5, 15, 20 years. And we're going to roll it out in phases. But there is an overall strategy that companies can execute against. Because otherwise, it's kind of like, how on earth do we get started, right?
Well, that's a great question. How are companies getting started? Is everyone kind of siloed, reinventing the wheel in their own companies for approaching that step-by-step guide to more sustainable practices? Or
well, I would throw that question to Al, but
I was like, maybe this is a question for Al. Are there resources out there at this point for companies wanting to put these new practices in place?
Absolutely. There's firms willing to help all the companies that are out there. In fact, that's the space we're in, is helping strategy and operationalize whatever that strategy looks like. But there's other firms like us that are doing the same thing. and it goes beyond the oil and gas industry. You imagine the world where all manufacturing is done with zero carbon. All beer production is zero carbon. All battery production consumes zero carbon. I mean, you just take it to, and to Andrew's point, you're talking tens of trillions of dollars, if not hundreds of trillions of dollars on a global basis for that energy transition to truly get incorporated around the world. And we're focused on, and people like BlackRock are focused on the 15% of the population in the OECD countries. Well, there's 85% of the population that just wants the cheapest fuel, cheapest power, clean water, and they're growing economies. So it's kind of like COVID. I mean, we can solve COVID in a country, and it works as long as nobody comes into the country or leaves the country. And energy transition kind of feels the same way. It is a massive undertaking, and everybody signed on to the Paris Accord, but the ones that signed on to the Paris Accord, China's going to build 1,000 coal plants. That's kind of inconsistent with the Paris Accord. So a lot of countries signed on that really aren't going to be able to meet it, and everybody knows that. So it's going to be a major undertaking, and who's going to pay for it? Ultimately, the consumer's going to have to pay for it. I mean, either through higher taxes or through a carbon tax or through paying more at the pump or more for your power. There's very little way around that.
Yeah, absolutely. How much of the conversation of branding in the energy industry is ESG related to?
It's a major component of it. People was the first major change I saw in our industry. Was really even though we've gone through a lot of downsizing, and it's going to sound kind of ironic, but the value that people bring to an organization is recognized. The value of diverse boards now is recognized, which is the G component of it. So I think it started, but the environmental piece, or the E of ESG, is the one that's on the fast track to try to get some kind of meaningful change. And Andrew's right. It's driven by the investors, and it's not just the BlackRocks of the world. Their LPs are telling them, we want you to invest back companies that are in the energy transition space.
Yeah, absolutely. From a logistics perspective, I mean, blockchain has a huge presence in this conversation. So I guess explain specifically how blockchain can really make or break this ESG movement.
When we talk about blockchain, make sure we're not talking about cryptocurrencies or any of that stuff, right?
I got one of those.
So blockchain, at the end of the day, with the way we use it, it's about trust, right? So why are companies using blockchain and the smart contract network to automate their transactions? It's so you can deliver trust, so that if you go to a gas station, you swipe your credit card, you pump your gas, and you leave, you've automated that transaction. And you trust that the meter within the gas pump is correct, and that the measures are correct, and the price is consistent. So you've got a trusted infrastructure. And what we're doing is the same thing for industrial transactions. So rather than the 30, 40 step manual process, which is incredibly expensive for both sides of the transaction, if you've got a meter in the field and you've got a price and you've got a contract, you don't need to have a whole bunch of back office staff doing reconciliations every month and running your company off estimates. You know this product was delivered, you know the price, you know the terms. And so then what you do is you put the transactions in a blockchain for all the different participants in the transaction. And because of blockchain, there's a term, it's called immutable, which means it can't be changed. No party in the transaction can change it unilaterally. So that it's a secure, guaranteed record of what happened. So why is it useful in the ESG space? Because, as I said before, people want to know that I'm investing in a company with an ESG record that I can trust and rely on, because I know that the data is coming from the field. Because why are we in the ESG space? I mean, that's an interesting question, because it's not what we're known for, right? It's because if you know the efficiency of an engine, and you know how much fuel the engine has used, and you know how long it's been used for, not only can you charge for that, but you can also report on it. You can report the carbon footprint. So if you know it for that engine, then you know it for that facility, then you know it for that that total asset. You can build up from the bottom up. You know for a fact, and because it is in an unchangeable record, a blockchain. You can use it for creating trust, not creating trust. I mean, you can guarantee trust, which then can be used for reporting to the board of directors, to investors, to anybody else who needs to know it. So it's all about trust.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's trust, there's transparency, but there's also optimization involved. And I don't want to put you on the spot on this, but how much of these industries, what percentage are still not optimized until you introduce blockchain into the mix?
Now you did put me on the spot. I appreciate that. That's a really good question. I would say a tiny fraction are optimized. I mean, I think that what the internet did was it fundamentally changed how transactions are done in the consumer space, right? The idea that you can go to Amazon and have basically an unlimited number of books that you can order, and now it's not just books, it's everything. The internet fundamentally changed the consumer behavior and how we buy. The same is happening with smart contracts for industry. It's just the beginning. It's very, 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 very beginning. But it's going to have the same impact. It's going to have, forget about data Gumbo, just if it's not us, it's somebody. The smart contract, you can't put the genie back in the bottle because you can guarantee it. You can measure what's happening in the field and you can use it to automate a transaction. That's changing, is bringing whole new industries to market. For example, measurement as a service. It's enabling new contracts to be negotiated. So rather than paying for delivery of a bulk chemical, you can pay for just what is used. Mm-hmm. It's changing how contracts are negotiated. They're much more specific. So we are just at the very, very beginning of a seismic change, which is just as big or not bigger because it's industry than the impact the internet had on consumer behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we are in Texas, and the elephant in the room is that very recently our state's grid went down during a terrible winter storm. So, Al, I wonder if you can put into context, what really happened and how do we prevent that from happening again?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I can tell you how to prevent it, but a few things we learned from it. One is there was no strategy in place at the state level or at the business level to handle 4 days of cold weather. And for anybody in the north of this country, you would be laughing right now to think 4 days of cold weather shut down Texas. It did. We lost our power, we lost access to water. It was like a Cat 5 hurricane coming through Houston and Texas in general. So the impact was massive. One thing I do know coming out of this is it reinforced the need for multiple supply streams into the power plants. It's not just wind, it's not just solar, it's not just natural gas, it's not just oil, it's not just coal, that we need multiple sources of feedstock to the power industry. But I think there's been a lot of finger pointing. This is going to be a while unwinding what actually took place because it's not going to be simple. There were mistakes made across the board, it would appear, both at the state level as well as, frankly, at the business level. But one thing we do take away from it is we need a plan. Because clearly we're likely going to have 4 other cold days at some point in the next 100 years hitting Texas, and nobody wants to live through that again.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew, for you, what did you learn kind of coming out of what happened last week, and what are your thoughts moving forward?
I learned that it sucks to be without water.
Absolutely.
We live on property with a well, and so we didn't have to worry about the quality of the water. But I mean, there's the generator's running. My neighbor has a generator, and she had power, and I didn't. So I mean, going back to my previous point about the creativity of contracts and how industry is changing. If you've got solar panels, Gina, a lady we work with, Gina, she's got solar panels, and so she had power for her house by solar panels. And there's a company called Generac. I mean, everybody's buying. Everybody knows Generac at this point in Texas. But I mean, they've got some creative ways of being able to harvest the generation capacity across consumers statewide and feeding that back into the grid. So I think that, to Al's point, I mean, there's some fundamental changes that have to happen in the infrastructure layer. But I also think there's going to be some creative ways and new ways of, I mean, consumers, talking for myself about how we protect ourselves. So we're ready for it. I mean, it's one thing for a hurricane. An ice storm is something completely different. But then what else? I mean, if Generac has got this, the ability to have basically distributed distribution across the whole state, which can be fed into the grid so you're kind of going from the bottom up. I mean, I think there's going to be some creative ways, and there's going to be, I mean, talking about Houston and the entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, it's the ability for people in Houston to be able to take. I mean, we got some brilliant engineers, and the ability to be innovative and to, you work with these companies who do amazing things, generating and creating power. And I think in oil and gas and everything else, they have been kicked up the backside very personally, and they're going to figure out ways of solving this.
That's why the energy industry, going through the whole energy transitions, pretty well suited for it. We've got great engineers, as Andrew said. We've got infrastructure at the wazoo, whether that be pipelines or old wells or anything else that we can use. So we've actually, and we're pretty good at project management. So as far as an industry that should be driving the energy transition and some of the changes, Houston's where it's at. That's where it should be driven from. And the entrepreneurial spirit, as Andrew said, is alive and well. If there's a problem to be solved and there's a decent return in solving it, people will do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you invest in startups and you work very closely with them. What are you looking for from startups in this space?
That's a good question. We're early stage investors, so we like people that have really good ideas to solve some problem that we think is worthy of solving. And it can be healthcare. We do a lot of healthcare investing. It generally has a technology bent with it. And we've invested in about 25 investments, 26 now, over the last 3 or 4 years. So we're pretty active in the space. And that's why I can tell you the ecosystem's alive and well. There's a lot of venture capital appetite here in Texas, not just in Austin, but in Houston, for helping companies get off the ground. And the first round of funding is really hard. We just backed 2 female-owned companies because there's a void in the marketplace in female entrepreneurs getting funded. And great ideas, and we looked at it and said, this is silly that you can't get funded. So we were one of the early funders in them. Again, there's so much opportunity, and we're really excited by it. We get a kick out of seeing other companies be successful, and if we can help them be successful, that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. So in light of everything we've discussed today, I guess I wonder, what are you, for each of you, so Andrew, you have an extra couple seconds to think of your answer, but what are you keeping a close eye on this year and the next couple of years in both the energy transition space and the ESG space?
Okay. We're, our firm, at least half of our projects are in the digital and energy transition space, and the two go hand in hand. Technology is going to have to solve a lot of the ESG questions that are out there and some of the aspirations. So we're spending an inordinate amount of time unlocking that code, and I think if we're going to drive improved performance in the energy industry, I don't care which part of the energy industry, we're going to have to work better together and collaborate more together. That's partly data Gumbo, but it's partly just thinking differently as an executive team and at the board level. So we're spending a lot of time at thinking about that and working with our clients on that, because we can't look back 10 years from now and say, oh, we missed this opportunity or we destroyed this capital. We got to do a much better job. So that's kind of where our focus is as a firm.
Andrew, what about you? What do you have your eyes on?
Yeah, I mean, I think Al used the right word, is aspirational. There's a lot of aspirational goals, but I think that as I said earlier on, it's going to change from aspirational goals to, okay, prove it. And I think, the board of directors is, rather than having this fluffy goal is maybe a little bit unfair, but some of them are fluffy goals. We're going to be carbon neutral by 2050. Well, what does that mean? How? What's the strategy? How are you going to do this? So I think there's going to be a lot of questions asked, and 2021, I think, is going to be that year where, okay, what is the plan? You've talked about the aspirational goals. What is your plan, and how are you going to do it? And give us a blueprint, give us a roadmap. And then, and measurement, right? How do we know where you are? How do we know where you are? Not we say where you are, how do we know where you are? And how do we measure progress towards that goal that you've set? So I think this year and next year are going to be around about that. It's okay, prove it. And I think that's, take it from a big fluffy aspirational goal to concrete.
Gotcha. Well, thank you both for this conversation. I think you've given me a lot to think about, I'm sure viewers as well. So I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie.